Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cameron Russell. I'm the Executive Director of Fordham CLIP, and on behalf of Professor Eidenberg and also Princeton CITP, we are glad that all of you have come to Symposium this year. We have our fifth panel of the day and our trendiest, most stylish panel of the day. We've entitled it Concept to Shelf, Marketing, Merchandising, and Retail. As customers, technology continues to improve our shopping experience. It has also brought forward a new frontier of possibilities for designers, marketers, operations managers, and inventory managers. Designer jeans are tagged with radio frequency identification. Cell phones track shoppers' movements throughout a store. And there's even a smart handbag that can monitor your spending for you. It can warn if it determines that you are in the, quote, danger spending zone. And if you're a real spendthrift, it can even be set to recognize your favorite store and lock when you are nearby it because you can't be trusted. So how are we thinking about connectivity in this space? What are some of the challenges and advantages of connecting and virtualizing all of the steps from design and development, the production line, and the merchandising floor? This should be a dynamic panel discussion today. We have experts from industry, legal experts as well. We're privileged to have such an extraordinary panel with us. First, we'll be hearing from Amanda Parks, who's the founder and CEO of Skinteractive Studio and a visiting scientist at MIT Media Lab. Then we'll hear from Meral Battle, store manager of Nicholas Kirkwood Limited, and also with 20 years experience in the luxury retail business. Third, we'll hear from Rob Sanchez, Chief Strategy Officer, Manufacturer New York, followed by Flora Garcia, Privacy and Security Counsel, former Senior Director of Privacy at Time, and last but not least, Professor Susan Scafidi, Academic Director also, the Fashion Law Institute at Fordham Law School here. So we'll begin with 5 or 10 minutes from each panelist. Then we will open it up and have a discussion among us as a panel. And then lastly, we'll have some questions from you guys to hear your thoughts and questions. So we'll first hear from Ms. Amanda Parks.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. I understand this is mostly a room full of lawyers and law students, so I thought I'd prepare some visuals because I primarily work as a designer and technologist. So I'm going to share some relatively far out there thoughts for the space, coming from what I've been doing for the past about 10 years, working in wearable technology in various forms. So just to give you a brief intro, so this is what my studio works on, everything from developing data sensor networks for projects that went to the Olympics last year, working on construction for couture lines, all the way through to wearable technology implementation for startups, as well as basically biology research into the future of wearable technologies and all different kinds of circuits. I'm also, Rob's going to talk a lot more about Manufacturing New York, but I'm the newly appointed Director of Technology and Research for Manufacturing New York, which is basically a fashion incubator hybrid with a full production facility as well as an R&D facility, which we're opening up in Sunset Park. I teach at Columbia University in the Department of Architecture. I also teach at MIT, joined between the Media Lab and the Business School, mostly concepts around the body, interactivity, environments, and technology. And I am the former founder of an algae biofuels company, which is part of my connection to biology. I spent 6 years at the MIT Media Lab getting a PhD, and so I also oftentimes curate interactive exhibitions around ideas of sustainability and interactivity. So my background comes from this space of designing interactivity and interaction design paradigms, mostly in science museums. So really looking at the experience of how we get information, we transfer information, and we understand new concepts. This relates very much into this idea of the retail and marketing, but this comes from a kind of educational perspective in technology. So after moving from various science museums, this is how I got to the Media Lab, and my work there looked something like this, which is all about this interaction between the virtual world and the physical world. And I find this to be where the most interesting space is in the Internet of Things, basically looking at like what the Internet of Things was before it was called the Internet of Things. So What we're talking about is interaction with fashion, embedded technology in fashion, modular robotics that are programmable by demonstration, all the way up through thermochromic inks in screens, and relationships between the physical and virtual worlds that are sort of surprise, delight, and do unexpected things. So first thing that I want to focus on is basically the things in the Internet of Things. And I think this is often lost. We talk about networking, we talk about how we experience large amounts of data, but we are still physical humans and we interact with things and are delighted by them, especially if they're well designed. So this is a project that came out of my lab at the Media Lab from 1999, which is pretty important when you see what it does. But basically it was using this metaphor where we're used to bottles being containers of stuff. Sorry, I don't think the audio is working. I got it, there we go. So why can't bottles be containers of virtual stuff? So when you open a bottle, it lets out a sound, and this is a techno trio. Now what this is a hacked RFID tag, basically the homemade one, coil of wire in the neck of that bottle, a piece of iron core, you open it, it's a super simple switch. But the idea is that the magic comes from that object, from the interaction with the object, and we understand the metaphor in the interaction paradigm. So what we have now in this is like this. So this is like 99. This was like really hard to do, and now we have low power Bluetooth, which is becoming cheaper and completely more relevant. We can actually put it into all different kinds of objects. I know that these guys are going to talk a lot more about that. This paradigm of stick and find, and those then work in tandem with things like Newair, which is a hyper-localized proximity platform, which I encourage you to look up. And this is just a really quick demo of how it works, especially.
Okay, this is a demonstration of Newair's marketing engine. This is a rest screen. It just says T-Mobile, and it's just waiting for someone, and it sees a phone come into range and says, "Hey there." So the phone is coming into range with my iOS developer Brian, and as it gets closer and closer and closer, "That's right, I'm talking to you," will change to say who you are, and it's my iPhone, and it says, "Hey, great to see you, Dave."
So you can see how those kinds of hyper-localized interactions can lend to very, very specific content that greets you, and you have a very personal relationship almost with it in a sense that it has a sense of intelligence. So there's augmented reality there in a new kind of way. So this paradigm also lends itself to thinking about the body as a platform. And I'm going back to another technology that was first developed in our lab and then became the basis for Minority Report. One of our students there became the technology advisor there, and then turned into a company, a beautiful case of research turning into science fiction, turning into reality. And so this is G-Speak, which is that basically you can interact with screens based on how your body moves. And John Underkoffler, who developed this, basically created clubs. And actually the video that he made for but it's just all different kinds of interactions. A much more personalized space, and not just sort of saying, okay, this device knows that I'm here and it can give me information when you're in a retail environment, but also I have some sort of autonomy there, and I can speak back to it and tell me what it tell me I want to see it, I want to see this, I want to dig into the content, very much from just the spatial dynamic of our bodies. So what does this mean to think about the future of wearables and this kind of interaction with our body? So I'm going now to a very simple, or not simple, but new startup called Ringly, which I've been working with. And this is basically using these this paradigm of low power Bluetooth with an app. But most importantly, this is actually a beautiful ring with a real stone and real and real metal that women will want to wear, and it's going to be sold not in gadget stores but in fashion stores. And it's the kind of thing that you can just turn it off and it'll still be just a beautiful piece of jewelry. But it's also a notification device. It has a relatively simple interaction where there's a vibrating motor in the ring as well as an LED, and it can be a notifier. Lots of women miss calls and texts because your phone is in your purse. And this is a constant thing where women are holding their their phones at parties because they're waiting for something important. And so this allows you to have a very private interaction with if it's just a vibrating motor on your finger, or it can be more public if the LED is outward facing. So this is kind of one of my favorite paradigms of wearables that's moving into, this is actually a real fashion object. So when we think about this, just to kind of go sort of bigger on what wearables is, the sphere of the body, right now we're really just thinking about bracelets, the Google Glass, and and some very small sorts of interactions, but the body is a whole new space. So spheres of the body, we think about just, generally, like all over the body, where can we start to think about gesture, these relationships between different places on the body, what cameras can see about our body that knows things about our posture, about our size, are you a child, are you an adult, those kinds of things. Then looking inside the body, we are going to have injectables pretty soon. And it's coming, and we need to think about how we want to interact with them. It's one of the scariest spaces, also richest in opportunity, and so we have to be very much aware and proactive about what happens with that space, that it's not abused. Then thinking a little bit larger to the things that we hold and the things that we put down. So, if there's options for us, so it's not just things that are connected to us, but things that we choose to carry with us at different times. And then, obviously, our relationship to external objects, our relationships to each other, and to the environment as a whole. If there's sensors all over this room, what does that mean about your kind of interaction? So, these devices are becoming, they're coming into mainstream fashion. This is September issue of Vogue from last year, but the September issue is always the sort of biggest trend-setting issue of the year. This is the Nike Fuel Band photographed, styled along with other objects, same part of the same shoot. The wearables market is projected to be $8.3 billion by 2018, so it's no small part of the industry. So can we start to think about, something other than plastic bracelets on our wrists in this space, to think about the things of the Internet of Things? So just a couple of ideas, sort of paradigms. This is a QR code dress from Marc Jacobs, a concept piece. Obviously, it only shoots one thing, but I'm very much interested in the sort of notions of craft inside of fashion and how you can start to take very high-tech paradigms and translate them into craft and vice versa. And then for me, the most important thing is this return to natural materials and paradigms, where we do not want to live in a world where every surface is a screen and every object we own is embedded with electronics. We want to think about natural materials, both for the pleasure of living and like thinking about soft surfaces and real materials, but also for sustainability and this idea that we cannot keep continuum circuits using rare earth metals as we are. So a couple of paradigms. This is a project that I worked on in 2005, which was an interface, a public installation interface in Tokyo where there's an LED screen, a sensing surface, which connects back to a natural body of water. That's a pond that's next to it, and the waves continue and bounce back and forth. So this kind of seamless relationship between the physical material and what is going on with the screen. Took us about 2 months to design and 2 years to install, but that's another story. We're getting better at that. And then another idea of how can we use the natural state change of materials as, sort of a method for conveying information. So this is a condensation display, which uses water as a pixel. So basically what you have is a sheet of like a wet fabric. When you put a little bit of heat behind it, it creates a puff of condensation, and you can use this as a surface. Obviously, this is low res in this state, but there's no way that there's not a reason that we can't turn this into a sort of a higher res version. And then even all the way to using the actual, utilizing what happens inside of natural organisms. This is a project from one of my students that uses bioluminescent bacteria, which I'm sure that maybe if you guys ever been to, say for instance, Vieques in Puerto Rico, as you move them, as you agitate them, they begin to light up. It's a natural display. It's literally a natural LED. And she created a basically interface where you would run your hand over it and it would glow. It's obviously incredibly simple interaction, but the possibility to harness the power of what is going on in microorganisms and in sort of the natural processes at large is out there. And then just to finish this up, some of the other things of state of the art. We have Suzanne Lee, BioCouture, which is a grown leather. I encourage you to look at her TED Talk, it went viral. But this is using what's called bacterial cellulosis, which is a waste from producing kombucha to make a very strong leather. This just came out last week. This is a conductive lettuce, where you can actually grow lettuce into a wire. Some of the research I've been doing on slime molds do the same thing. Slime molds have wayfinding patterns. And then the top left is NC10, is a company that's making what they're called circuit tattoos or circuit band-aids, which have, they're not actually natural materials right now, but they are basically as close to the skin as you can get. So just gonna leave you with that. I didn't say anything about privacy, but I'm sure we'll get into that in the discussion. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Amanda. It's fascinating. Next, we'll hear from Meral Battle, who can tell us about his vast experience, 20 years on the retail floor, and perhaps comment a little bit on all of the possibilities and on the concepts, conceptual possibilities and technologies that Amanda alluded to.
Thank you. As Cameron mentioned, my name is Marell, and I have over approximately 20 years of experience in luxury retail here in New York City. Everything from working at various places like Barney's New York, Louis Vuitton, Jeffrey New York, Jimmy Choo, and currently at a place called Nicholas Kirkwood, which is a young luxury British shoe brand, primarily women's, but we've just ventured into the menswear market. So it's a new avenue for us. And what I can say is that definitely during my time in retail, that definitely during my time in retail here in New York, you could see initially back in the 90s, the total domination of the brick and mortar stores and, the big three, or Bloomingdale's, Barney's, Bergdorf's, that kind of thing. And actually I'm grateful for that for the sake of my own job, but you can see the growth of online shopping, flash sale sites have definitely made their presence known in the market. Places like Net-a-Porter, Modo Operandi, and Gilt are just a few of the prominent ones that come to mind. So the interconnectivity of things over the course of time has definitely affected the retail market. People have found different ways to shop. They don't necessarily feel the need to venture out of their home if they don't want to. I think the crash of '08 certainly affected that. We saw it. I was working at a place called Jeffrey New York at the time, and you literally saw that people didn't shop the same way they did previously. They were more cautious, so therefore someone who normally came in and you could get her to buy 7 pairs of shoes at one time, all of a sudden she came in and she's like, okay, I'm going to take these 2 and I'll think about this 3rd one. So as a commissioned salesperson, you're kind of like, that's not what you want to hear, but it was the reality of things. I definitely feel like in the course of things, the economy has improved and you definitely see that disposable income is back and people are excited about venturing out of the home and venturing into the store and being out in the marketplace. But along that same lines, people still like what they found as far as being able to shop online, the differences, being able to find certain bargains along the way. So it's definitely changed the landscape of the market. But I think that at the same time, you have that tactile stimulation that you get at the brick and mortar store to be able to go in and actually interact with the salesperson. He or she, are expected to be an expert on what it is they're selling. It's very key that each season salespeople are educated by either designer or the designer's representative as to like his or her inspiration, what makes this special, what makes this collection stand out from the last one. Why do you need this? There are other people, who love the convenience and the ease of shopping online, where you don't feel like you have that pressure or that actual interaction with a human being. So it varies. I know personally there are times I like shopping online, the ease and convenience of knowing that in a day or two it's going to be at my apartment and I don't have to worry about it, especially when I only have 1 day off in the week and I really don't want to go into another store after being in my store for 6 days. So I can certainly appreciate it. One of the things I think I really enjoy about what I do right now is working in a mono brand versus working at like Barney's or Jeffrey, New York, where they were multi-brand stores where you have a little bit of everything, which is pretty incredible because you can do that one-stop shopping. People were coming to the store and like, what's the point of me buying Chanel here when I can go to a Chanel boutique? Well, the point of you buying Chanel here is that you can come in and you can buy the Chanel, but you can also look at, you know, the Gucci and the Prada and compare and contrast them rather than going to all the different boutiques, the individual boutiques, and having to figure out, well, what's the difference per se? One of the things I like about, as I said, the monobrand, or working at a small company like Nicholas Kirkwood, is the interaction of actually working with the designer himself. We're a British company, but currently we only have 3 stores in the whole entire world. Our flagship in London, the New York store, which I run, and now our Vegas store, which is about to turn a year old. So the interaction of actually being involved with a small company that's on the verge of becoming a much bigger company is something really exciting to me. Last fall, it was announced that Nicholas sold a majority stake in the company to LVMH, which is a big deal, obviously, in the fashion world. To have that kind of support and financial backing takes your business to the next level. So it's been interesting over the last 6 months since that announcement was made to see the slow infiltration of this large conglomerate into this small company and to see the changes that are taking place. And you know, it's pretty exciting to be part of that. And looking forward to it. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Marell. Okay, next we have Rob Sanchez. He's Chief Strategy Officer at Manufacture New York.
Can you all hear me? Right here? Okay, perfect. I tend to speak softly, so hopefully if I drop in volume, let me know. So I'm actually glad that you spoke about what you did because it ties in a little bit to what I've been kind of kicking around. I was asked to speak about both marketing and operations and that side of the merchandising. And one of the key things that happened when the internet happened and when e-commerce took off was that there began to be intercompany or intra-company competition between brick and mortar and e-commerce. And all of a sudden you had different operating groups inside of the same company, inside of the same brand, competing for the same customer and with different price points and different margins. And so you would have some tension. You'd mentioned people who come into the store to see and touch and then go home to buy, which is this idea of showrooming where brick and mortar goes from being a purchase point to being an experience point, and then that person goes into the home. And one of the interesting things with the Internet of Things is people are trying to, for the first time, to answer the question of how does a brand track so that they know if somebody comes into a store to buy and then go to experience and then goes home to buy, how do we know that so we can give credit to the business units in our company so that we can justify having that brick and mortar? And you can't just do that by saying, okay, there's 20 feet on the ground and we had 18 people buy at home in the same day, and so we would guess that 20% of that 20 people who showed up also bought online. And now you have companies like Stylinity, which are saying, okay, we can do that by replacing what used to be the dressing room with a social experience where the person comes in, they put the clothes on, and then it turns into a camera. And they can take high-res photos from all 4 sides, upload that to a social network, send it out, and get a coupon if they go home and buy. And now they can get 5%, 10% off. And then that also becomes a way to generate additional looks online as well. So now a brick and mortar is going from being a single experience for a user to being a social experience in a way that kind of helps expand the footprint. And all of a sudden you can track across physical to the cyberspace. I'm sure that other technology will come out, and as we get better at cell phone tracking and knowing exactly who everybody is, then brands will be better able to know exactly how you experience their brand across all of your life, and then use that to manipulate how they speak to you and how they interact with you. And then kind of segueing from that into a little bit of the operations side, So merchandising is a science, and there's a bit of art to it as well, but there's a lot of numbers that go into determining what is on the shelves and how you see exactly. No? Okay, sorry about that. Maybe I should just hold it or something. Okay. All right, so the move from the marketing side to the operations side and then the ability to connect the two is very important. So when you're looking at the way the consumer interacts inside of a store, there are now technologies, as I'm sure was mentioned earlier today, that track where your cell phone is. Currently, a lot of that is only seen in large retailers. It's only seen at the largest companies because they're the ones who are able to put in those systems. However, you have companies like Philips who just came up with a light fixture that turns your all the lighting above you in the store into a tracking device so that they can capture that same information. And now all of a sudden a small boutique can put in 4 fluorescent lights and know where you're standing on the sales floor. There's also now technology that runs a video camera in the store that looks at your age, your race, your gender, and your height, and everything else, anything about you. It pulls that information and provides it directly to the store. And I worked on a project taking that technology and putting it on the street where you can see people moving neighborhood to neighborhood using phone booths as the data capturing device, so that as somebody walks down a street, you can tell exactly where they are, and then as they cross the street, the next set of phone booths pick them up, and all of a sudden you can map the entire city of New York by gender, by age, by whatever you want to do with that data, and then use that to influence how you choose the location of your store, how you choose the merchandise you put in the window, and so on. So the interesting thing for me is, and I just learned about this fairly recently, every cell phone, to allow the transfer of data, has an international mobile subscriber identity, and then a second identifier called the media access control. So those two codes exist on your phone without you. There's no setting for you to turn them off. It's how your phone notifies the network, and the network confirms that you are the user you say you are. So if your phone is on without the battery removed, and sometimes even when your phone is completely off, you still have the ability to tell where that phone is, and you have a unique number for that specific phone. And since we no longer share phones, our behaviors have shared a lot, you now have a way of knowing who a precise person is, and you can then take that information and tag it to data sets, and you can know not only who the person is, where they're walking, and everything about them, but you can also say, okay, you were in my store in this aisle, you looked at this item. When you get home tonight, you will see an ad for that specific item because you paused there for 17 seconds. And so that level of marketing specificity is going to really change the way that we interact with everything around us. Am I close there?
Fantastic.
Okay.
If you don't mind, before we hear from Flora and Susan, I'd like to pose a question to the panel. Marell, you liked the fact that you work for a small company now. You've had a lot of experience working in a lot of different areas. You thought it was a resource to a small company to be able to have direct contact with the designer, be able to have that interaction when you take it to the retail floor. And then Rob mentioned that the cell phone tracking was primarily a resource for the larger companies, and it was something that wasn't really accessible to the smaller companies, or they don't do it in practice. So do we think that the interconnectivity now is more of is it a barrier to entry, or is it a resource for small firms that will assist them to enter the market more readily?
Well, I think that the technology is changing so that a small firm has access to it. And that access allows them, right now you're seeing a shift in sort of the democratization of data to a point where anyone who can think about how to use data can access the data they need to do it. And that, I think, is kind of the change here. It becomes a limitation not of the technology, but of the thought behind the technology and the use patterns. And So I think you're going to actually see a change in the way that small brands use data and capture data and what they're interested in doing.
It will also matter the kind of structure around how the data gets locked down and who owns it and what does it cost to get access. So if the big companies are in control of it, then they can set up a whole different structure. But it's not about the data is there for everyone.
Okay, next, we're excited to hear from Flora Garcia.
Let's see if I can get this right. Is that right? So I hold it. So I'd like to sort of take a step back and talk about privacy as privacy. I mean, we need we've heard a lot of different things today, and I just Julie Brill's saying that she thinks of data brokers as the traditional data brokers, the Axioms, the Experians of the world. But once you know that I'm walking down the street and exactly where I'm going, I kind of think you've become a data broker. And I think that that's one of the things that we've got to take to these questions as we look at them from a legal standpoint. And I want to, the step I want to take back is to sort of a level of simplicity. And I think about, there's an Onion video, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but about the Google Village in the mountains, where everybody drops off their cell phone. I'm not getting any responses though. Okay, somebody's seen it. You got to go look it up because it's a good video if you're ever doing any training or anything like that. Anyway, you drop off your cell phone, you end up in this village, no cell phones, and you're off the grid. And it pokes good fun at it. But honestly, you know, I think one thing that we have not touched on quite enough is that sense of choice. You know, I choose to wear my Fitbit. And for all the talking about Fitbit up here that we've had today, nobody has talked about the privacy policy, which is actually pretty clear and pretty well written. And since I'm a geek and a privacy lawyer, I tend to read privacy policies. You know, Ringley doesn't have one yet. I'm glad to take care of that for you. And you know, cars. Tesla has a privacy policy for their car on their website. Porsche doesn't. I don't know what they're sending back, but it's for the website, not for the car. You know, it's hard and it's a new world, but I think what we have to do is try to go back a step and simplify it and think, you know, my phone is already like something I'm carrying around. How's that different than a ring? You know, we need to make analogies and try to go back to, instead of making these hugely complicated, take a step back and think about what the user should control. And I think this, one of the previous speakers talked about FIPS as opposed to privacy by design. And I think that's an absolutely correct thing, that we need to think about the principles as opposed at the very, very beginning of construction. And I don't like the term privacy by design, I'm sorry. And someday I will write the paper proposing a new topic, but a new name for it. But I think that's part of the problem with it, is that we've got this concept that isn't really, you want to sit down and when you make these systems, whatever these systems are, you want to have discussed whether people expect what's going to happen. Do I expect when there's an exchange, when I get a cool ring that says this is going to tell you when your phone is ringing, do I expect that maybe somebody's counting how many times my phone rings? To me, that's reasonable. But you have to think about that at the time of construction, and you have to communicate it to the user. And I think that concept gets us a very, very far way. And so we have plenty of time. I'm going to pass now. That's okay.
Can I actually pose one question? So Flora's discussion of privacy, she mentioned, you know, we have to think about it. In the supply chain, are you guys seeing a whole lot of thought about it? I know, Rob, you have a startup space. Are you seeing, is it a topic of discussion? This is a very similar question to what we asked the Genius Princeton students this morning, first thing.
So the interesting thing on the supply side is that you're seeing a shift to a model of transparency as a marketing tool. And what that means is that you're flipping the privacy question. You're saying, how can I be more public about what I'm doing as a way of communicating the values of my brand? So we are working with a company, SourceMap. We've met with them a couple times to discuss what they're doing, but Amanda knows them far greater.
Yeah, my
but
co-professor at Columbia. Yeah, so it's a piece of mapping software that basically will show, you could put in the supply chain of any object and then publish it to, you know, anybody in your user base. And it is like Rob said, being used as much as a marketing, both internally for big companies to know what's going on with their own supply chains, which is an interesting space, but also externally.
And the interesting there is that there's a lot of compliance issues where you actually don't know, like SEC requirements around precious metals, and where if you don't know where your metals are coming from, it's very hard to comply with the law that requires you to know that and disclose it.
Yeah, and part of the thing is that it's all basically so distributed and decentralized that people don't know inside of companies where the next thing down the chain is. And so if you have a centralized system where people can everybody can put that up, then you basically can create a kind of more of a global chain, and there's no one person needs to know every single item. And that actually can be about privacy too, because if you could only access, you know, one point in either direction on your own chain and keep the rest of the network closed if you decide to.
And so from a startup perspective, you're also using that information to be able to do group buys, to be able to have some of the vertical integration that the big companies can benefit from. You're able to band together with 10 or 15 other startups to buy that roll of fabric that you otherwise couldn't afford. And it allows you to change the economics of your situation as well.
So Flora, are you satisfied with that response? Does it sound like these guys are staying on top of it?
I'm never satisfied. That's the beauty of being a privacy lawyer. There's always something else to worry about. But I think this is actually a really important point, because what you're talking about is the building of a brand. And if I think your brand is terrible and is going to ruin my life, I'm not going to use it, you know? And I went to the website last night, and it's beautiful, and these shoes are beautiful. And like you want to build a brand that there's a connection with and that there's trust in, and you were using the words delight. You know, that's what companies want. They want to delight their customers. And if you're accidentally leaving all your data from all your credit card transactions online in the dumpster in the back unshredded, that's not about delight, and that's about destroying your brand. And I think that in a lot of ways, some of what you're talking about, when you're in that startup mentality, and I think a lot of times too, when you're of the digital generation, you also have a sensitivity to that transfer of data, and an imagination about what that transfer of data is. We were whispering as somebody was talking about the Axiom tool for transparency. You know, that's great, but what it doesn't say is that there are another 17,000 data points on me that aren't listed in that tool, and they may not be very interesting. I mean, they may be really kind of boring, but I don't know what they are. You're only collecting so many, and so I'm actually pretty happy about this. And I think if you go through the list of beloved brands, they're usually people who, rightly or wrongly, I've heard people say, Dropbox is secure. I know it's secure. It says it's secure. And, you know, have you pen tested it? I think that you go through and you have a sense of trust in them. Whether they hold up to that belief of yours, time will tell.
Okay, so unless we need a reply to that reply, we'll now hear from Susan Scafidi.
Great. While we're getting the slides up, I just want to answer this question: what is your car saying to your shoes? I like to think that at least when I'm wearing Nicholas Kirkwood, the car can only say, nice shoes, cool. So, thank you. And I am today, by the way, so I'm representing. So as Cameron kindly told you, I run the Fashion Law Institute here, and we've done a little bit of work around this area. A year ago, the museum at FIT had an exhibit on fashion and technology, and we did a collaboration with them, and last month we repeated that, thinking not so much about the past, the history of fashion and technology, but about the present and about patents around some of the kinds of things that we just heard about. But today, we have, let me figure out how this works, a slightly different topic. I want to look at history briefly to talk about apparel and authentication and technology, and then come back around to some legal issues. So this actually goes back a long way, right? As long as technology has moved forward, it has affected the movement of fashion forward. And that's certainly true in the authentication realm. Going back to Madeleine Vianney in the 1920s, a French designer who realized that handwriting analysis was one of the technologies of the era that was heavily discussed, as was fingerprinting technology. So in an effort to authenticate her work, she took every one of her labels, sat in her atelier, originally signed them, and then had her signature embroidered on them, and also took her own thumb, put her right thumb in an ink pad, and thumbprinted all of her labels. More recently, we've seen hologram technology, sadly easily counterfeited, but hologram technology on tags nonetheless. Still evolving very recently, DNA tags, and announced even late last year, DNA woven into textiles, so DNA tags woven into actual textiles that can survive washing and many other things. All of those technologies, however, are static technologies, and the technologies we're talking about today are more dynamic technologies, those that can change the information that they're sharing or that they're developing or collecting over time. And the one that has been most talked about in the fashion context is RFID technology. So you see a picture of a seemingly innocent-looking Calvin Klein tag, the real thing. You see the back of the tag, which is not just the threads. There's something a little more, and that something a little more, when peeled away, is that RFID technology, the label that allows the garment to be followed in space, followed through post-manufacture, through shipping, when it's still in a pallet or in a giant shipping container, onto the retail shelves and home with the consumer, which, as you can imagine, as this kind of technology developed, raised a few privacy eyebrows. So when Benetton was one of the first to announce they were doing this back in 2003, a consumer organization called Caspian, Consumers Against Supermarket Privacy Invasion and Numbering, actually called for a boycott of Benetton. And I really hope that the members of Caspian were not in fact walking around naked, but that was their claim, that they would really rather not. Since then, other companies have announced this, bravely actually announced the same. By the way, there was a little confusion over Benetton. It turns out that the Benetton announcement was a little garbled. The guy who ran the lab was also named Meral Battle. So when they were talking numbers and what Benetton was going to do, it got a little confused in the public mind. But that's just a footnote in history. Post-Benetton, Levi's actually announced in 2006 that they were going to be experimenting with RFID technology. Didn't get calls for a boycott, but got similar pushback. Macy's has had the same experience. But by the time things get all the way to Walmart, and Walmart embraces not only shipping container and pallet RFID technology, but product level RFID technology, you know that the deal is done. It's coming. It's going to be here. In fact, it already is here. And in many ways, that's a great thing, right? It does terrific from the retail perspective. It's tremendous in terms of keeping track of inventory. It does allow the collection of data. And of course, we've talked earlier about how different technologies can just simply enhance things. This kind of technology can also eliminate some negatives for the consumer. When you think about as a consumer, when you go shopping and you want something, you want it to be in stock, right? This kind of technology can help that sort of thing happen. But what I particularly wanted to focus on is how this kind of technology can actually eliminate some of the negatives, not just for the consumer, but for the retailers, putting these two things together, right? Both the legal side and the technological side. So as Marell very well knows and can probably comment on, I hope will comment on, because he knows a lot more about it than I do, one issue in the retail realm is one of shrinkage. Not the kind of shrinkage you see here, and not when you accidentally put the sweater in the washing machine. Shrinkage in the retail context is about inventory that is reduced or shrinks unintentionally. So things like includes things like employee theft and shoplifting and administrative error, where perhaps a discount is applied before it should be, even vendor fraud. So one way we deal with this sort of thing is through criminal law and laws of fraud, but RFID technology can also address various problems of shrinkage in retail. Another issue is diversion, all right? So diversion, not the amusing kind, but diversion, what we would call in the legal context more often the gray market, however many shades thereof. So when we think about parallel imports or gray market goods, we're talking about things that are sold where they shouldn't be. That is to say, in terms of geographic distribution, a lot of companies take advantage of price arbitrage. If Levi's, for example, might sell for $50 here, the same pair might sell for $200 in Asia. And so obviously a company like that takes advantage of things like price arbitrage or different preferences in terms of size or other kinds of local market preferences doesn't necessarily want its distribution channels muddied. And so they write into contracts with distributors and with vendors limited geographical permissions. First sale doctrine kills all of that, of course, but one way to at least keep track of how much diversion is going on, how much of a gray market issue there is again through these kinds of information technologies, and particularly RFID technology. Now, Marell made reference to something that probably went by a lot of you very quickly, the year 2008 and the crash. That, in the retail world, that to me is like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake or living through 9/11. Is a huge, huge disaster. And one of the other retail issues that it has occurred is the problem of domino discounting. That is to say, once one store takes discounts on a particular kind of merchandise or a particular set of brands, everyone else has to follow suit. And I give you Saks Fifth Avenue here because in November of 2008, well before the post-Thanksgiving sales that are more traditional, and certainly well before the post-holiday sales that are even more traditional in the United States, Saks Fifth Avenue looked at the fact that we just had a terrible economic crash, looked at its massive levels of inventory, which had been based on 2007 numbers, and said, wow, we're slashing prices, and we're slashing prices now. So we saw discounts of between 40 to 70% before Thanksgiving, discounts of up to 85% after Thanksgiving. As a consumer, that was fabulous. However, from the retail perspective, not so exciting, right? And so after that, a lot of different, and certainly the various brands were not thrilled because they take part of the hit as well. And so the fashion industry got together and they talked about some things that would be in clear violation of antitrust law in terms of price maintenance. And although I will say that the year before, some of you are familiar with the Legion case, Legion against PSKS, the Supreme Court case that gave some more flexibility in at least vertical price management and resale limits on discounting. But by and large, it's not so easy to collectively address concerns about unanticipated or excessive discounting. But what you can do is through technologies like this, keep much closer track of your inventory and adjust much more quickly and have delivery dates much closer to much more refined so that you don't run into the problems of excess inventory. So that's a retail problem that the consumers might not want to see solved. We all live on both sides of that equation, but there it is. And then, of course, the big one, counterfeiting. Perhaps the final use I wanted to mention of this kind of technology, this authentication or identification technology, is to actually label things so that we know whether they are genuine or not. And there's even conversation about how to move that question forward, not just static information about whether something is or is not genuine, but wouldn't it be nice the next time that you walk into the store to have the store automatically and electronically recognize your authentic handbag and greet you accordingly? Is counterfeiting a problem? Well, the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition thinks so. We see numbers thrown around in the $600 million range in the U.S. alone in terms of losses. Folks like Dan Ariely, the psychologist at Duke, has said that actually carrying a counterfeit makes you dishonest. Very interesting experimentation there. There are other studies that have said, no, it's just a gateway drug to the real thing. But one way or another, it is certainly something that these technologies can help us keep track of. So really always the question when we're talking about technologies, including technologies like this incorporated into clothing, into actual labels, is what does the future look like? Well, when Joel Reidenberg had a conversation about this, I think he and I more or less agreed. And in both cases, this lady came to mind. And I think the answer is that in the future, we will all know exactly what comes between Brooke and her Calvins. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Scafidi. So
I'll take it. I think you could do away with RFID and make me a good bit happier. I think it's really kind of a confusing technology on a bunch of different fronts. I mean, I think you have to go back to what are we tolerating as a society? And if as a society I am tolerating cameras on the street corners and my passport having chips in it and lots of other things along the same lines. And one of the first RFID projects I actually worked on was wristbands. Kids go to festivals and they want to get the something that's wandering around the festival. In this particular case, it was the Heisman Trophy. It wasn't something like a character or anything. But so they get automatically put up on their Facebook accounts. You know, at what point there are we doing any kind of notice or release or anything? And I would argue that in that situation, you have the ability to do notice and release. I don't think we figured it out with clothing, and I think there's some question too about like where are the different levels of RFID? Like we do not have a good we have not yet developed the conversation for saying this is near field and this is far field and your RFID wallet will really work and all those sorts of things. But I think it's a concern, and I think it's also a concern that there are vendors out there who can connect my phone, my personal phone, to my work BlackBerry, to my home computer, to where I live, and watch me walk through Saks and see how much I spent on day one. Of course, there are privacy concerns there, you know, but I think we have to look at it societally. And what are we willing to tolerate? What's okay? Where is there a benefit for me? And where isn't there? And I think that some of that just goes back to transparency.
Though, if this is, and this may be a question to give back to Marell, this is obviously a change in scale of the kinds of things we know, but in retail, people who are good at it already know a whole lot about their customers and keep a whole lot of data. I mean, those black books are impressive from what I hear. So are we right to be this worried about privacy? But what more is it going to teach you about a customer to know where she's walking and who and how often she's on the telephone?
Well, I think one of the things about it, though, as a salesperson, and a really good salesperson, he or she is keeping all this information and keeping all the data. But one of the things, it's almost inherent, almost like doctor-patient relationship. You have this. They have this unwritten rule of privacy, where you are going to respect your client's privacy, but because the minute you break her trust, you can lose her.
Well, and she's told you this. Like, she's told
Right.
you her size. She's told you the phone number. I mean, I think that that's the transparency. You know what I've told you. You know no more. And that's a different relationship than when, I pick up a pair of jeans and it follows me to my underage photo shoot.
Right. Very, very true. I mean, as you said, all the information that she's providing to you, your client is providing to you, like, her address, maybe the private cell phone number, her credit card number, like, that was given freely and entrusted to you, but you as a salesperson or the associate or whatever, you guard that with your life because that is part of your livelihood to build this relationship. I have a client, she and I have been working, I've worked with her for almost 9 years. I've never met her in my life. Our whole relationship has been over the phone and the internet. But, literally, I remember she would call the store, and she's a lawyer. So she's very specific about what she likes, what she wants. And I got it pretty quickly. And I would get phone calls, and we don't have direct dial. So, she might get switched around several times in the store when they're trying to locate me. And everyone would come up to me like, there's a really angry woman on the phone. Really? And I was like, and as soon as I hear that, I know who. I get on the phone and she's like, "Hi, darling, how are you?" It's like she's totally different with me. Because we have this relationship. She expects, she knows that I have her best interest at heart at all times. She's like, "How come you haven't sent me anything?" I'm like, "'Cause I have nothing for you. I'm not going to waste your time and send you something that I know is not going to work for you." But so that we've developed this trust over all that time, and the minute you break that trust, as a retailer, you're in trouble.
And is your brand. In your case, again, that's your brand. That's you.
I think what you're touching on is a perfect example, though, that this is the personal touch. And how do we get our kinds of machines and devices to build this kind of trust? And I think that what's interesting is this idea of cost-benefit analysis, what someone sort of touched on is, that there's lots of algorithms set up in Amazon to create recommendations for you. And I think it becomes a question of, how much data are you willing to give away to be able to kind of have things that actually help you in your life? And that can be really come across, and that's when the sort of, designers of these kinds of systems have to take that into account. And so if I'm constantly getting the books recommended to me that I would want to be reading anyways, I am willing to kind of let go of some more of that data. And so how do we as kind of technology producers and design producers create those environments where people feel more comfortable and they do trust us? I think it's not exactly going deep, very, very deep into the kind of legal levels of privacy, but this is the sort of, the sort of front end consumer facing part of it. And then just one other point is to think about, the issues around big data and how we actually make meaning from those data points. And that's something that's really highly contested right now inside of technology circles. And part of it is because there's a lot of danger, especially around the data that's collected from devices like Fitbit and generally along with wearables, is you can actually, based on whatever algorithms you can create two very different opposing pictures of what a person's health is or what a person's whatever is. And then you can sit there and justify it and say, oh, the data doesn't lie. Well, yes, but how does the algorithm manipulate that data? And I think that that's where we're going to get into the connection of privacy is, having a whole cloud of numbers just sitting there in a spreadsheet isn't going to be that helpful in any one way without an algorithm to interpret it. And that's where I want to see more of the kind of investigation going on.
And for me, there's two questions that came up as everyone was discussing. The first one is that the issue that I have with the in-store is that there's no opt-out. And we all have to eat. We all do that. Very few of us live in a trailer and grow our own food. Most of us go to grocery stores. you can't exactly opt out of modern life and the tracking that's inherent. And so all the discussions of privacy that rest on, well, you've chosen to give up your data for this return, for this benefit, those are kind of gone. I mean, you can use ad block on your internet browser and see fewer ads and not know as much about MasterCard or whatever, and that's great, but that doesn't actually interfere with your experience of browsing the web. Usually, there's limited times when it will matter, but you can't do that when a store is making the decision for you and holding food or clothing or shelter as the thing that you have to opt in to, like the thing that you would have to give up to opt out. And then the other thing is what I love about RFID and near field is that the definitions of what privacy and what is private information wreak havoc with near field and RFID. For instance, your name on your MasterCard and the number on the MasterCard are both considered public by MasterCard, but your the expiration date and the 3-digit code on the back aren't, which means that they don't encrypt that information on your MasterCard. And there's a professor who developed a device that you could put in a chair that if somebody sat down, it would pull the credit card number and the information, and it would also pull your passport number, and it would pull everything else that's there, because that's not considered private. And so when you're in a store and you're tagging, like, you can grab all that information and there's no opt-out, and you don't actually know what the legal definition of private and not private is, then all of a sudden you're in a world where you can't actually give informed consent at all. So kind of went down a rabbit hole.
Thank you. So we'll see if retail location analytics can service a client as personally and adeptly as Marell can his long-standing client. But we have a few minutes, certainly, for questions from the audience.
This very much parallels what I see with student privacy, where one person commented about the importance of the black book and do we need all the data, or do the teachers already know who their students are? My dilemma is, do I tweet about this? Do I tell people about this? You know, if I tell people about this, they'll get off the student privacy, but what will happen to the economy? I mean, this is really frightening.
I think you have to, I mean, you can definitely, if you haven't read the book, The Circle, it will make you so paranoid. It's very interesting. It's not the best written book you'll ever read, but it's frightening, but it's also, you have to think about it as empowering as well. I mean, when you think about what a cell phone can do and what I had one in 1995, and like I would never have imagined in high school that we would have such an amazing device that did so many things. So you have to look at the upside before anytime you get scared or freaked out, you have to look at the upside. And then you have to sort of slice and dice. And I think you touched on a really, really important point, where a user doesn't know what's going on, which is what we hate about the NSA stuff. We don't know where they got it from. We don't know which companies gave it up. We don't know how much they gave up. We don't know what they're still doing or what changes they made. We don't know what happens to all the pictures, walking down 6th Avenue that are taken. And I think that's we have to clamor for that as a society. And until we care about that, until we start to talk about it as something that offends us, we're looking like we don't care.
Yeah, Heather?
I'm also, can you hear me? I'm also pretty terrified by this. This is really eye-opening. Thank you. I'm going to go home and cut all the tags off out of all my clothing. As these tracking devices get incorporated into fashion, I wonder if you envision a similar market for obfuscation technologies being incorporated. So to block or distort my ID as I move through the world if I don't want to be tracked, or is that kind of a novelty one-off because that's not as profitable to the industry?
And jammers too. I like in the U.S. Right. I think cell phone jammers are not allowed, but I know somebody who takes one of those buses from New York to New Jersey who just happens to have one and just happens to turn it on every time it gets loud. I think you're absolutely right. I think any kind of disruptive technology makes for the whole circle of the marketplace.
Disruptive and protective, right? We had a conversation there. There are handbags being developed that will protect from exactly that chair that you might otherwise sit down in and have everything taken. So.
And I actually know somebody who builds Faraday cages for your apartment so that you can have an actual environment that doesn't have electronic interference. So you can build a theater to watch movies in that doesn't allow any communication into that space. So I think that over time it will definitely build. Yeah.
The question with those, though, I agree that there's lots of these technologies being developed, and they're mostly done, yes, smaller designers, et cetera, kind of more in the activist realm. The questions are about what you give up by having those on your phone, or on whatever your jam or whatever you're protecting against. You also give up a whole other your ability to kind of use your phone, right? And so that's not a perfect solution either, right? It sort of spans to the extreme.
Jordan.
So I thought I was very privacy savvy when I would go shopping with my wife or mother, and we go to checkout and they ask for a phone number, email address, and I would say, you don't have to tell them that. And I thought I was very savvy by doing that, and I want to thank you all for humbling me and making me realize I knew far much less about what is going on with fashion and privacy than I ever imagined. My question is, I think we've heard a lot from you about how these technologies can create some amazing new features and efficiencies, and I'm wondering if you've thought at all about how they can also maybe exacerbate or perpetuate existing problems within the world of fashion. Specifically, I'm thinking in terms of price discrimination and customer discrimination. I mean, we've seen 2 or 3 times in the last year customers arrested at, I think, Barney's for the crime of luxury shopping while black, so to speak. There are issues around who has access to these high-end items and who is able to buy them. And branding, part of branding is making sure or trying to influence the type of customer that you have that's reflecting your brand. And I see, as much as I can see some interesting efficiencies and new uses for this stuff, also a way that could really cement some of these practices around who do we want to be able to see these items, who's going to be able to afford them, and how are we going to change prices and exposure to try and influence that. And I guess my question is, how have you thought about this, and how do you try and either work around it or not?
I think that's a great point. I mean, the internet has democratized luxury tremendously. The internet has democratized luxury tremendously in terms of that kind of access, right? Nobody knows if I'm shopping at home at midnight if I'm in my PJs or what I look like or what I weigh or anything else. But these technologies do have the possibility to roll that back the other way, to change the increasingly democratized access to certain items or access to wait lists or that sort of thing. And it is a matter of concern. On the other hand, the economic climate is such that, yes, we have Cristal making terrible statements about who drinks its champagne, or Burberry withdrawing the Novacek in part because of counterfeiting issues, but in part because it got so popular in pardon the language, chav culture in Britain. So we do have brands responding strongly to that. And I think we can expect that these technologies will permit the same kinds of responses and less countervailing economic weights. And the general public's new access to luxury on the internet serve as countervailing weights. I think that's a great point.
I think this is also an example where you need to kind of go back and look at other analogous situations. We've all heard about the, I forget, is it plane tickets or car rentals that people with Macs get, plane tickets, get higher prices than other people because supposedly we're more affluent. I don't think we are. I think we just like better computers. But, there are analogous things going back that, definitely not feeling affluent. yeah, they're the people the stores that didn't put price tags on. We've all heard, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. We've all heard stories about different ways that has been done in the past. I think that the flip side, and I'm not sure I like this flip side because it's pro tracking, but the flip side is you now have proof in a way. You now have, I tried to do this and I couldn't do it, and so maybe the marketplace will take care of it that way.
I think it also has to be a policy decision. You see, was it Kansas that was it Kansas or Arizona? Arizona always does everything wrong. It might have been Kansas. Where they tried to pass the law that would permit you to actively discriminate against gays from a religious... Arizona. Okay, yeah. They both did? Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Prominent one.
Yeah. And so when you have pushback from society saying that this isn't acceptable, and you can put in place or not allow things to be put in place that let you use the data in a way that's discriminatory, then you can address these issues. But it's not the fault of the technology; it's the people using the technology and the data. And so I think that you have to sort of say what will we allow as a society for this data to be used for. And I think we need to start assuming that the data is always going to be there and you can't stop. Like, that horse is out of the barn. Now let's see what we're going to do with that horse is sort of more the way to approach it.
And you just made me remember that, some of the technologies may indeed help on an individual level. Hermes would never have shut the door in Oprah's face in Paris had they been using facial recognition technology.
So we've heard from our experts. Thank you.